Imagine moving your own daughter's furniture into your house, only to see flashing red and blue lights pulling into your driveway. The neighbors stop to stare, the HOA board members stand smugly on the sidewalk, and the officers step out as if you've committed a crime. All you did was carry boxes inside your own property, yet somehow it turned into a scene fit for a police report. What kind of community calls 911 over a simple move, and what does it say about the power an HOA can hold? Keep watching, because this confrontation only gets worse. Welcome to the channel where HOA disputes come to life. Here you'll find shocking stories of power struggles, petty rules, and neighbors gone too far. If you've ever wondered how far an HOA can push, or what happens when homeowners fight back, you're in the right place. Let's dive into today's story. At first, life in the neighborhood seemed calm. The streets were lined with tidy lawns, the kind of place where kids rode their bikes in the evenings and neighbors waved when passing by. For years, the family at the center of this story believed they had found a safe, welcoming community. The homeowner worked hard, paid their dues on time, and expected nothing more than to enjoy the house they had built a life in. When the daughter needed to move back home, it felt like a new chapter. There was excitement about bringing her things inside, setting up a room, and turning the house into a shared space again. It should have been ordinary, a weekend move, a driveway full of boxes, and family working together. But in this neighborhood, ordinary was never simple. Beneath the surface, the HOA had a reputation. Some saw it as a protector of order, others as a group of people who thrived on control. The rules were strict, often enforced with little warning. Small details, like the height of a mailbox or the shade of paint on a fence, had already sparked disputes with other homeowners. The family tried to stay out of it, quietly following the guidelines without question. Still, they couldn't ignore the whispers about board members who watched too closely and neighbors who took pleasure in reporting the smallest violations. It created an undercurrent of tension, like living under a spotlight where every move might be judged. So when moving day arrived, the stage was already set. The cars parked out front, the furniture carried across the driveway, even the laughter that carried through the air. All of it was visible to the people who believed they had the authority to monitor every detail. What should have been a private family moment was about to become a test of power. The question wasn't whether the HOA would notice. It was how far they would go once they did. The first sign of trouble came almost immediately. As the family carried the first round of furniture across the driveway, one of the HOA board members walked by, phone in hand, eyes locked on the scene. There was no greeting, no small talk, not even a polite acknowledgement that this was just a family helping their daughter move. Instead, the board member slowed down, tapped something into the phone, and lingered just long enough to make their presence felt. It wasn't the kind of pause you could ignore. It was a message: you were being watched. At first, the homeowner brushed it off. After all, what could be wrong about moving furniture into your own house? The driveway belonged to them. The house belonged to them. There was no rule against helping your child move in. Yet, within an hour, a notice appeared in their email inbox. It accused them of creating a disturbance, and warned that unauthorized moving activity could be subject to fines. The language was cold and threatening, written as though a weekend family project were a public nuisance. The notice was just the beginning. By the second trip with the moving truck, the HOA president himself appeared at the curb. He didn't ask questions. He didn't try to understand. Instead, he started reading off a list of supposed violations: too many cars parked on the street, boxes stacked where neighbors could see, even the sound of furniture being moved described as disruptive noise. Each complaint sounded more absurd than the last, but he delivered them with a kind of confidence that made it clear he believed he had authority. The homeowner tried to stay calm, explaining that this was their daughter, their property, their driveway. But the HOA president wasn't listening. He simply wrote down notes on a clipboard and repeated that all incidents will be reported. With every word, the air grew heavier, the simple act of moving in turning into a tense standoff. Still, the family pushed forward. They kept unloading boxes, determined not to let intimidation ruin the day. That's when the fines started. Within 24 hours, an official letter arrived demanding payment for parking violations and unsightly storage. The total wasn't huge, but it was enough to sting, and more importantly, it was a signal. The HOA was flexing its muscle, making it clear that resistance would be costly. And the harassment didn't stop there. Neighbors began showing up, some with cameras in hand, filming the move as though they were gathering evidence for a crime. A simple trip across the driveway with a chair turned into a walk under surveillance, every step recorded and scrutinized. The daughter, already stressed from the move, felt humiliated. She hadn't even settled back into her own room before realizing her return home had sparked neighborhood drama. But the HOA wasn't done. Days later, another letter arrived, this one far more aggressive. It accused the family of operating an unapproved business from the property, claiming that the sight of trucks and multiple helpers suggested a commercial activity. The accusation was outrageous, but it gave the HOA an excuse to escalate. They threatened larger fines and even hinted at legal action. What had begun as a simple move was now framed as a violation that could bring lawyers into the picture. The homeowner tried to fight back, sending emails, citing property rights, and demanding to know what rule they had supposedly broken. The responses were vague, filled with legal jargon, and always ended with the same refrain: pay the fines, comply with the HOA, or face consequences. No matter how many times they asked for clarification, the answer was always the same: control first, explanation never. The pressure took its toll. Friends who came to help with the move were stopped at the gate, questioned about their business, and in some cases, turned away. Delivery drivers complained that they were being hassled. Even the family's own car was cited for being parked improperly, despite sitting in the same driveway it had occupied for years. The HOA had turned everyday life into a minefield, where any action could spark another letter, another fine, another confrontation. And then came the breaking point. One evening, as the family was unloading the last pieces of furniture, headlights appeared at the end of the street. The car didn't pass by. It stopped. Two figures stepped out, not board members this time, but police officers. Their radios crackled as they approached, and the flashing red and blue lights filled the driveway with an unmistakable sense of dread. The HOA had called 911. The officers explained they had received a report of a domestic disturbance involving unauthorized activity and potential trespassing. The words were surreal: trespassing on their own property. The homeowner stood stunned, holding the paperwork that proved ownership, wondering how a call like this could even be taken seriously. Yet, here they were, forced to defend themselves to strangers with badges, all because the HOA decided moving day was grounds for emergency intervention. The daughter's eyes welled up as neighbors gathered once again to watch. Some whispered, some smirked, and others simply stared. The humiliation cut deep. What should have been a private family memory had been transformed into a public spectacle, orchestrated by the very people meant to protect the community. The officers, after a tense exchange, realized the report had no basis. There was no crime. No disturbance. Just a family moving furniture. But the damage was done. The image of police cars outside the home lingered, a scar on the family's sense of peace. And the HOA, far from apologizing, doubled down. They sent another notice the very next day, claiming the presence of police validated their concerns and justified even stricter oversight going forward. Each step forward seemed to drag the family deeper into the HOA's web. Their once quiet neighborhood had turned hostile, their supposed community revealing itself as an apparatus of control. The homeowner faced a choice: keep paying fines and living under constant surveillance, or fight back against the very system that had weaponized rules against them. The question hung in the air. If the HOA was willing to call 911 over a couch and some boxes, what would they do next? The showdown didn't arrive quietly. It came in the form of an HOA meeting, the kind of gathering that most homeowners avoided because it dragged on with arguments about landscaping budgets and paint colors. But this time, the agenda was different. On paper, it was a routine meeting. In reality, it was a trial. The homeowner walked in with a folder under one arm, packed with copies of every notice, every fine, every email exchange, and even the incident report from the night police showed up. The room was full, not just of board members, but of neighbors who had heard enough rumors to know something dramatic was about to happen. The air buzzed with a mix of curiosity and tension, as if everyone sensed that this night would not end with simple paperwork. The HOA president sat at the front, flanked by board members who looked more like jurors than neighbors. They wore stern expressions, papers stacked in front of them, ready to defend their authority. It was clear they believed they held the upper hand. The meeting began with formalities, but it didn't take long before the president brought up the family's case. His voice carried the weight of rehearsed authority. He spoke of repeated violations, failure to comply, and disruption of community standards. He even claimed the family's moving day had caused fear among neighbors. Each phrase was designed to paint a picture of recklessness, to strip away sympathy and justify the escalating punishment. But then came the moment that shifted everything. The homeowner stood up, calm but steady, and pulled out the stack of documents. One by one, they laid them out on the table in front of the board, letters with vague accusations, fines with no clear rule attached, emails that dodged every request for clarity. And finally, the police report, the official record showing that the 911 call had no merit, that officers had found no disturbance, no crime, no reason for emergency involvement. The room fell silent. Neighbors leaned forward, eyes darting between the paperwork and the board members who suddenly seemed less confident. The homeowner didn't raise their voice. They didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than any angry outburst could. Then came the gut punch. The homeowner read aloud a passage from the community bylaws, the very rules the HOA had sworn to uphold. The clause was clear. No board member had the authority to call law enforcement over non-criminal activity without first attempting to resolve the matter directly. It was written in black and white, signed years ago by the same president now sitting red-faced at the head of the table. The tension cracked. Murmurs spread across the room. Some neighbors shook their heads, others whispered about overreach, and a few smirked at the embarrassment now visible on the board's faces. The president tried to regain control, banging a gavel and insisting that proper procedures had been followed. But the damage was already done. The homeowners had turned the board's favorite weapon, the rules, back against them. As the president sputtered, the homeowner revealed the final blow. They had already filed a formal complaint with the county, backed by legal counsel, citing harassment, abuse of authority, and defamation. The evidence wasn't just in the room. It was now in the hands of people with real power to investigate. For once, it wasn't the family on trial. It was the HOA. The silence that followed wasn't the quiet of control. It was the silence of collapse. The board members avoided eye contact, their authority suddenly fragile. The neighbors, once passive observers, now had proof that the HOA could be challenged, that the fear they lived under wasn't invincible. But the climax didn't end there. The homeowner turned to the audience of neighbors and asked a simple question. How many of you have been fined for something you didn't even know was a rule? Slowly, hands began to rise. First a few, then more, until the room was filled with raised arms. What had begun as a personal fight now revealed itself as a community-wide revolt. The president's voice cracked as he attempted to call the meeting back to order, but it was too late. The board had lost control of the narrative. The authority they had used to intimidate was slipping through their fingers, replaced by collective outrage and the undeniable weight of evidence. For the family, it was vindication, a moment of triumph after weeks of humiliation and harassment. For the HOA, it was exposure, the public unraveling of their power play, revealed for everyone to see. And yet, as the homeowner gathered their papers and prepared to leave, there was no celebration. Just a quiet awareness that this was not the end, but the turning point. The fight wasn't over. The HOA would not simply walk away. The question now wasn't whether the family had won this battle. It was what the board, cornered and humiliated, would try next. The lights of the community center flickered as the meeting ended, neighbors spilling out into the night with hushed voices and shaken expressions. Some offered nods of support, others avoided eye contact, but all of them knew they had witnessed something irreversible. The balance of power had shifted. And as the family walked back to their car, the echoes of the confrontation still ringing in their ears, one thought lingered above all: if an HOA could abuse its authority this far, how many other families had already suffered in silence? The climax had passed, but the impact was just beginning. The days after the explosive meeting carried a strange silence. For the first time in weeks, there were no new fines in the mailbox, no angry letters tucked into the doorframe, no strangers loitering at the end of the driveway with cameras. The street felt quiet. The family could finally step outside without expecting confrontation. But silence didn't mean the fight was over. Behind the scenes, the HOA scrambled to regain control. The president sent emails insisting the board had acted appropriately. They tried to frame the confrontation as a misunderstanding, downplaying the call to police as if it had been standard protocol. Yet neighbors weren't buying it. They had seen the documents, heard the bylaws read aloud, and watched the board squirm under the weight of its own rules. The seed of doubt had been planted. Then came the first ripple of real change. Several neighbors, emboldened by the homeowner's stand, began reviewing their own histories with the HOA. Old fines were dug up, letters compared, and patterns emerged. Families who once thought they were alone in being singled out realized they weren't. They began to talk, quietly at first, then more openly. A network formed, one fueled by shared frustration and the knowledge that the HOA's authority wasn't as absolute as it had always claimed. Petitions started circulating. Neighbors called for transparency, demanding that financial records be open for review. Rumors spread that funds had been mismanaged, that money collected from fines had been funneled into pet projects that benefited board members more than the community. Whether true or not, the pressure mounted. The HOA, once feared, now found itself under a spotlight it couldn't easily escape. For the family, the biggest shift was internal. Where there had once been fear and humiliation, there was now resolve. The daughter no longer felt like she had moved back into a hostile environment. Instead, she felt like she was part of a fight that mattered, not just for her family, but for every homeowner who had endured the same kind of bullying. The night the police showed up had been their lowest point, but it had also sparked the chain of events that exposed the board's abuse of power. The legal complaint filed with the county gained traction. Investigators reached out, asking questions, requesting documents, and reviewing evidence. The family provided everything they had, each piece building a case that painted the board as reckless, vindictive, and out of line with its own bylaws. The mere fact that an official investigation was underway changed the tone in the neighborhood. Suddenly, the people who once whispered in fear about the HOA began speaking more boldly, no longer worried about retaliation. It didn't take long before cracks appeared within the board itself. One member quietly resigned, citing personal reasons, though everyone knew the pressure had grown unbearable. Another stopped showing up to meetings entirely. What had once looked like a united front began to fracture, and as the fractures widened, so did the community's confidence that change was possible. Months later, the county issued its findings. The investigation confirmed what the family had claimed all along: the HOA had acted outside its authority, weaponized vague rules, and filed complaints without merit. While criminal charges weren't pursued, the board was ordered to revise its policies, improve transparency, and halt the collection of disputed fines. The family's name was cleared, the fines erased, and the record corrected. It was vindication, but more than that, it was liberation. The family could finally exhale. Their driveway no longer felt like a stage for humiliation. Their home felt like a home again, not a battlefield. Neighbors began stopping by, some to offer thanks, others simply to acknowledge that the stand taken at the meeting had given them courage. A quiet solidarity grew where fear once lived. But the impact reached further still. Over time, new board elections came, and the old leadership was voted out. Fresh faces stepped in, promising to focus on real community improvements instead of policing every minor detail of homeowners' lives. They talked about building trust instead of tearing it down, about creating a neighborhood where families could thrive without looking over their shoulders. For the first time in years, the HOA began resembling what it was supposed to be, a group meant to serve, not control. The daughter's return home, once marked by flashing police lights and public humiliation, became a different kind of symbol. Her move back had triggered the confrontation, yes, but it also became the spark that forced change. What started as a simple weekend task, unloading boxes and setting up a bedroom, had uncovered a pattern of abuse that might have continued unchecked if no one had stood up. The story left scars, of course. Even with the outcome, the family could never forget the night police cars lit up their driveway, or the way neighbors stared as though they were criminals. That kind of humiliation lingers. But scars also tell a story of survival. And in this case, survival meant more than just enduring. It meant winning. For viewers, the takeaway is clear: HOAs hold power, but that power isn't limitless. It thrives on silence, on fear, and on the belief that ordinary homeowners can't fight back. But the moment someone challenges it, the facade cracks. Rules cut both ways, and when used against those who abuse them, they can bring accountability. In the end, the family didn't just move their daughter into their home. They moved an entire neighborhood toward change. They showed that courage, persistence, and the willingness to confront unfairness can ripple outward, reshaping the balance of power. So the next time you hear about an HOA that fines over lawn height, paint color, or parked cars, ask yourself, what would happen if one family finally said enough? Because sometimes, it only takes one confrontation to turn a whole community around. If you enjoyed this story and want more real HOA battles, make sure to hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe to the channel. Join the community of viewers who know the truth about HOAs, and never miss the next unbelievable story. Your support keeps these stories alive, and together, we shine a light on HOA abuse.